What if one building could change an entire city and rewrite the future of architecture? Imagine a forgotten industrial port fading into obscurity, suddenly becoming one of the most visited cultural destinations in the world, all because of one man's imagination. This isn't science fiction. It happened. And at the center of this transformation was a curious, soft-spoken dreamer who drew buildings like they were pieces of music, twisted metal like it was satin, and believed that even the strangest ideas could redefine reality. Today, we are remembering Frank Gehry, the legendary architect of the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, a man whose designs weren't just created, they were felt, feared, criticized, celebrated, and ultimately worshipped. Frank Gehry wasn't always a global icon. In fact, he was just a kid named Ephraim Goldberg, born in Toronto in 1929, fascinated by his grandmother's mysterious carp sales in the backyard. While other children played with toys, Gehry built shapes out of scraps, cardboard, and whatever he could salvage. But nobody could have predicted that years later, those same restless hands would create buildings that looked like they were alive, breathing, bending, and shimmering in the light. By the time Gehry moved to Los Angeles in the 1950s, architecture had become pure convention, clean boxes, straight lines, predictable shapes. Gehry hated it. He felt buildings had lost their soul, their energy, their chaos. He wanted movement. He wanted drama. He wanted emotion. And that desire would lead him to create one of the most important structures of the late 20th century, a building that changed everything, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao. When the Guggenheim Foundation approached Gehry in the early 1990s, Bilbao was struggling. It was polluted, bankrupt, declining, and almost forgotten by Europe. Officials were desperate for a miracle, something bold enough to make the world take notice again. Gehry's proposal shocked everyone. No corners, no predictable symmetry, no safe design. Instead, he envisioned a building that looked like something from the future. Massive flowing titanium curves, twisting walls, shapes that seemed almost impossible to construct. Many people thought it was madness. Some said it would bankrupt the city. Others feared it would be a total disaster. But Gehry didn't flinch. He once said, "If you know how it's going to turn out, it's not worth doing." He liked the unknown. He believed in risk. And that risk became history. Construction began in 1993. The builders were confused. The engineers were intimidated. Computer programs had to be rewritten. Tools had to be reinvented. And contractors had to learn new techniques just to make the building possible. Gehry refused to redesign or simplify. He pushed harder. He wanted Bilbao to become a place people traveled across oceans to visit. Critics laughed. Politicians doubted. But Gehry kept drawing. On October 18, 1997, when the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao finally opened, everything changed. The sunlight bounced off the titanium panels, creating a glowing, liquid effect. It looked less like a building and more like a sculpture dropped from another dimension. Journalists from around the world called it a miracle, a revolution, a masterpiece. Crowds came by the millions. Hotels filled. Restaurants opened. Businesses flourished. And suddenly, Bilbao was back on the map. Economists call it the Bilbao Effect, when one architectural masterpiece revives an entire city. No architect had ever done anything like this before. Gehry didn't just design a museum. He designed a turning point. He made architecture powerful again. But Gehry's legacy doesn't end in Spain. His designs are everywhere. The Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, the Dancing House in Prague, the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris, the Vitré Museum in Germany, and so many more. Each one is instantly recognizable, unusual, fluid, almost alive. You can't mistake a Gehry building for anyone else's. And that was his point. Gehry had critics, of course. Some said his buildings were too expensive, too dramatic, too weird, too loud. But Gehry never apologized. He believed architecture should not blend in. It should shock the senses. He wanted people to stop, stare, and feel something. Emotion mattered. Confusion was part of the experience. Fascination was mandatory. Behind the brilliance, Gehry was surprisingly humble. He didn't see himself as a genius. He struggled with insecurity, feared failure, and often thought his ideas were too risky. But every time he felt doubt, he pushed forward anyway. That is what made him different. He never stopped experimenting. Even in his 80s and 90s, Gehry kept designing, proving that creativity never retires. Many younger architects worshipped him: Zaha Hadid, Jark Ingels, Daniel Libeskind, and countless others. They saw Gehry as a rebel who believed imagination should never be restricted by rules, textbooks, or tradition. Gehry turned architecture into an artistic revolution, and the world took notice. Today, remembering Frank Gehry is not just remembering a name. It is remembering a force, a man who twisted steel like paper, who dared to challenge gravity, and who believed that a building could be poetry in motion. He once said architecture should be a living thing, not a dead box. And he proved it over and over again. The Guggenheim Bilbao remains one of the most photographed buildings in history. Millions of visitors still stand in front of it, staring, unsure whether they're looking at a building or witnessing a dream made real. And that is Gehry's greatest accomplishment. He turned imagination into a place you can walk into. Frank Gehry's story reminds us that one idea can transform a city, a generation, and the future. He didn't follow rules. He created his own. And every time someone visits Bilbao, sees the shining titanium curves, and whispers, "Wow," Gehry's legacy lives on. Every building tells a story. But Frank Gehry's buildings tell us something else: that creativity is courage, risk is necessary, and sometimes the craziest idea is the one that changes the world. No one knows how many architects will come and go in history, but there will never be another Frank Gehry.